Hi, welcome to the Sensible Project Manager Hangout. This is Hangout number 20, the big 20. And we are going to have a great topic today. This topic was, I sent out a question within the Sensible PM Hangout community on Google+. Alan Daly, as usual, stepped up to the plate, and he came up with a great suggestion, and he's joining me today in the Hangout. The topic for the day is project management changing fast enough? And the context behind that really goes off of a TED Talk that I'm actually just going to share with us to start at the Hangout. And hopefully I do this right. So Alan, I've tested this last night. I'm actually going to mute you.
Okay.
Actually, let's do the introductions first. Alan, you've been on here before. Let's introduce you first.
Yeah, so my name is Alan Daly. I'm an Agile coach, is my title, as it were, with a company called Big Visible Solutions. I spend my days being a consultant to companies, helping them learn how to use Agile methodologies for their project management and even other stuff too. But that's where I'm at a client today and taking some time to be here. It's fun to be here. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Alan. And just to let everybody know, Alan is not sitting in a studio with a green room. He just happens to be in a conference room that has a green background. So.
It does have a very bright green wall behind me. So.
All right, with that, let's go ahead. If I can do this right, I'm going to see if I can get this video to display. So everybody out there, once again, I tested this last night and things were working fine. I apologize for that. Let me do this. Why don't you go ahead, summarize the video. I'm going to go to PM Chat. I will let them have the link to the video on YouTube. It's so that they can take a look at it. So Alan, take it away.
So it's an interesting talk. How Eddie, I can't remember his last name now. He has an idea of saying that right now we are after midnight, and let me describe what he means by that term of being after midnight. And I'm going to try and draw it on the whiteboard here behind me, though I can't really see my whole screen, so we'll see how I do it here. If we look at this is time, right? Time going forward, and if we think about how our organizations and ourselves in the past, say, let's go back 20 years, maybe not even that far, but say 20 years in the past, we had a certain capacity to learn, and our organizations had a certain capacity to learn, and we would generally learn something and feel like we could be able to use that skill or that knowledge over a long period of time before it would become obsolete, or before we would have to learn something different or learn something new. And so our organizations were also set up to be a specialist in a certain type of product or a certain type of knowledge, and that's what we would do, and we would depend on our capability to handle that kind of knowledge and that type of product for many years to come. So we could say that on this little graph, we could say that our capacity to learn is relatively flat because we didn't have the need to learn a lot, nor are we capable of learning everything we might need to know very rapidly. So we have a relatively flat capacity to learn. But, and I wish I had a different colored marker for this, we have learned and seen that the amount or rate of change is accelerating very rapidly with computers. Moore's law making computers faster and faster. They double in speed every year and a half to 2 years. All these things that are happening, software eating the world. There's all kinds of concepts about this, but the rate of change in the world is accelerating and is not going to slow down anytime soon. And so the rate of change, right, of new knowledge is doing something like this. right? And so in the past, we were okay because we could learn, we had a faster rate of learning than the rate of change. So we could keep up and everything's fine. And somewhere along the way, right here at this point, the rate of change exceeded our capacity to learn. And so now we have this gap. This is a gap. We have no hope of learning everything that we might think we need to know in any given field or any given product or any given endeavor, because the knowledge in that area is going to change so fast that we can't keep up. And this point right here, where that inflection occurred, where change accelerated and surpassed our ability to learn, to keep up, that's the point that in the presentation that he calls midnight. He's saying we went to bed one night and the next morning we woke up and everything was different and everything had changed and the way we learn and have to operate is now different, but we don't know it yet and we didn't know it. And part of what we're struggling with now in our marketplaces and with our companies and with ourselves, our projects and our personal involvement, is the fact that there's always this gap. And so how do we make this gap smaller, or how do we work? What ways do we have to change the way we work so that we can live with that gap between knowledge and the rate of change? So that's my kind of summary of the point of his talk. And I don't think I talked as long as the video is.
Well, good.
So if some of our audience are watching the video right now, then they're still watching. It's worth watching.
Yes, it is, and I hate to have them miss this, but they can always go back to the recording. But you're right. I think I have an idea of what I might have done wrong, but that I'm not going to try to fix it. I did send out the link. There was a difference between what I tested last night and the slide and what I did today. I didn't think it would cause a problem, but hey, that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes.
I did send out the link to PM Chat. They were asking for it out there. Thanks everybody for not laughing too hard as we messed it up. But Alan, you did a great job. Just to kind of add to that, I think Ed did a great job on getting my thoughts going as to absolutely that we have so many things that are changing around us, and one of the concepts is our perception of what we knew to be true in the past. Because of the change that is happening around us, our perception might be incorrect today. So an example, because I was a little bit distracted, did you describe the length, the example that he used of the length of the lines?
No.
On the board? Maybe you could draw that on on your board behind you. Those two lines.
Right.
So this is what probably all of us have seen the example of the arrows, and because we have been trained to think that those two arrows are exactly the same length, even though there's an optical illusion. The lines themselves, even though there's an optical illusion there, but the way Eddie did it was he actually made that bottom arrow, a bottom line, longer. And so we are exactly, we've been trained to think that bottom one is shorter because it was a trick in the past, but things can change on us, and if we're not careful, we know that our perceptions can be altered by what we've known in the past.
Yeah, I use a concept a lot in my discussions about, I call them mental models, right? That we as humans, we can't possibly process everything we get, and so we create models in our mind that help us live with this world around us. And so we end up with a model of how I should work and how I should behave, and the corporation as a whole, through its culture and policies, has a model of how our business works and how our business should behave. And if the world changes around us such that model no longer fits, it's very hard for us to change our model because we've lived with that model for 10 years and it served us well, and suddenly it doesn't serve us well, but we don't know what to do because we don't want to change our model.
Exactly. Okay.
So some of the things that are changing, right, that are causing this gap here are things like social media, the internet. For example, companies no longer have control of the communication channels as they used to. It used to be that all the information about a company, for the most part, was put out by that company. But now, all of the company's employees have a phone and have an iPad or some of their tablet. They all have data connections. They're all on social media and everything. So good news or bad news can simply spread instantly to thousands of people without marketing or anybody else being able to control what that message is and exactly how it's going to flow. So that's just an example of one thing that's changing very rapidly.
Great. So we were just joined. I know that you have a different name, but Picus what is it? Picus Consulting that I.
Not a company, for the most part, was put out by that company. But now all of the company's employees have an iPad or.
I'm going to mute you because we're getting feedback from you, Picus. So if you could turn off your sound so we don't hear your feedback, then you'll need to unmute yourself. So once he gets back on, we'll introduce him. Let's go into that's kind of the summary of that video. Again, I've shared the video out on PM Chat, and I'll also have in the show notes or the Hangout notes later on. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, let's talk about some specific the idea of the speed of change that we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that I got thinking about, just a perfect example of the change or the speed that these changes are happening, is if you look at the telephone industry. Back in, okay, here's a guess. Let's see how good you are, Alan.
Okay.
Do you remember when the telephone was invented? When Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone? This is a trick question. Okay.
No, I don't. 1800 something. I have no idea.
Hey,
I don't remember.
1876, and the only reason why I know that is because I looked it up.
Okay.
So 1876, the phone was invented. 85 years later, in 1961, there was 100 million landline users, the subscriptions. In 1978, the first cellular subscription or service was established. So 1978 was the first cellular service. By 2002, there was over 1 billion mobile subscriptions. And today, 75% of the world have access to mobile phones, and there's over 6 billion mobile phones. By the year 2015, it's anticipated that we will have more mobile subscriptions than there are people in the world. I thought that was a great example of how quickly things are changing in our technology-driven world, and it's not that's not the only thing that the changes that are happening. That's a perfect example of how quickly things change for us today, and that ties into what you're talking about, because of everybody now has a cell phone. That communication that gets out from an organization is different.
Yes. Yeah, so in other words, the way we can collaborate, the way we can talk, it's, for example, right now, the technology we're using right now, right? I've started doing some Google Hangouts with people in Ireland, with people in Indonesia, where I can do a video talk with somebody completely around the world, and it takes me like 5 seconds to get into that talk and start chatting and talking. These things have profound effects on how we work, how we can work, And we need to, as opposed to fighting them or continuing to do things the old way, we need to figure out how do we take advantage of these capabilities of high-speed communication, high-speed change. How do we embrace it so that we use it to our advantage, because it's not going to go away. And rather than fight this wave of change, how do we ride the wave of change? And so that's kind of some of the gist of the topic that we're talking about here. Let me dig a little deeper into, for example, the software world. So that's my career, and my coaching is usually with software people.
Okay.
So like 40 years ago, 40 years ago? No, I'm thinking of the 1960s. So that's like 50 years ago. Computers were vastly expensive. They were huge. They took lots of power. They were very expensive to maintain and expensive to run. So when you fed data into it, which was hard to do, and you fed programming into it, which was also hard to do, it made the value of every second on that computer was very, very high. And so it made sense to do some planning and do some a lot of work, have a whole staff of 10 people just simply maintaining the computer, etc., because the cost of the computer actually exceeded the cost of the salary working on it, the people working on it, right? So if we fast forward to Moore's Law and come all the way to today, we have things like a watch on our wrist, or even the little sound chip in a greeting card is more powerful than computers of the 1950s and 60s. Computing power is extremely cheap, exceedingly cheap. It's orders and orders of magnitude cheaper than it used to be. And so now, if we're using ways of working that assume computers are expensive and assume computing time is expensive, then we're not embracing the fact that the world has changed and computing time is no longer expensive. Computing time is very, very cheap. So how can we, things like Agile and some other ideas, try to embrace and recognize the fact that computing time is super cheap. What's expensive now is people time, and getting the product right, getting it wrong, I should say, is expensive. And so let's take advantage of this change that has happened and alter the way we work so that we can match. So how do we do project management different from the 1960s, different from the 1980s, maybe even different from the 2000s now that we're in the 2010s? How is project management supposed to be different and keep up with this rapid change that we're going through?
Yeah, so before we actually answer that question, I mean, you laid out great. I wanted to point out the fact that the type of change that we're seeing around us is not, a lot of it we see in technology changes. But it's always technology that is moving fast around us. Some of the things I can think of, and those of us that are in the U.S. are seeing this happening live today, and that is the changes that we are in the U.S. are having to go through in relation to insurance and Obamacare. And that those that are not in the U.S., I'm sure that they might have been hearing these kinds of things, but those changes that happen on in this case, it's not necessarily a political thing. It's a change on the way things are being done in the world, and those kinds of changes also can and do affect how businesses react to those changes. Another thing I was thinking of is just the change of an economy. That will drive how things occur differently that we have to react to.
Yes. Yeah, all those things. Another quick example I just thought of was this change to the using devices on your airplane, right? That the FCC has said, oh yeah, you can have your device powered up during landings and takeoffs. But the reality is each airline has to certify that their planes are safe to do that, right? So it's essentially only a matter of paperwork. Well, some airlines have already certified that. They were able to jump on the the bandwagon and ride that marketing wave of good news and say, hey, we already have it, book with us, buy tickets with us. And there are some other airlines. My favorite airline, for example, Southwest Airlines, still does not allow electronic devices on takeoff and landing because, for whatever reason, they're not able to adapt to that change fast enough.
Well, that's a perfect example, and that actually can add or take away from the bottom line of a business.
Exactly.
Perfect example. So let's kind of take that discussion. So we know that these changes, though we've talked about some examples of changes, but let's talk about how what you just described is a perfect example of how businesses react to changes or how they use change to add to that bottom line, or if they're not fast enough, they could end up out of business. We see that from time to time. So let's talk a little bit more about that. How do businesses have to change? Then I think we'll get into the fact of, all right, if we understand how businesses are changing, how that relates to project management. So my thought on some examples of that change is the one that you came up with is probably one of the best ones I've heard about how airlines really are coming up with that, with changes to be able to bring customers on. Just things I think keep on seeing more and more over the last 10 years. I think that businesses have changed in the way that they have the way that they address. It looks like my video left me, but you can hear me still?
I can still hear you, yes.
Okay. I think that the businesses have changed significantly over the last, I would say, 10 years on how they have to react to their shareholders, especially if we're talking about public companies. I have noticed a difference in the way businesses run their business because of how they need to make sure that they hit the quarterly numbers, right? And that is causing them to change the way that they do the business. And it's affected me as a project manager because I have to react differently or I have to run a project differently because of that. Other examples you can think of?
Well, similar to the FAA thing in the airlines, I've done a lot of work in companies that are in financial services markets and so on, and they get regulation changes all the time. You know, somebody, the FTC or whatever it is, they'll come out with this new rule that you must report on this blah 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 by such and such a date, right? And that's a change. Is like sometimes they're easy to accommodate, sometimes they're not. But those sorts of regulation changes can cause whole projects to change direction because they have to go and fulfill this certain obligation by a certain date that they have no hope of changing unless they can get Congress to vote differently. So that's one place. Another place that I've seen things happen is competition. Because of computers and internet and all that stuff, there's all kinds of people or businesses live in fear of the startup that's going to come and eat their lunch, right? That some 5 guys in a room somewhere are going to start eating into their core business, and they have to be able to react to that and be ready for small, instant, if you will, competitors that might show up somewhere.
You're right, and sometimes, and that actually becomes an advantage for a smaller business that can be more agile on how they address it. They can move into an industry and change the framework of the landscape of that industry, just because they're able to act or react really quick because of their agile ability.
Yeah, so you have a big giant corporation, and people say, well, it takes a while to turn a ship around, and it does. But if somebody is starting as attacking your core business and taking market share.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a perfect example is what we are seeing with companies like Microsoft. It's interesting to me to see what's happening with them. They had they were running the show for years and years, and they've become so big. It just seems like, I don't know if the innovation is losing it, or just the fact that they're not as agile as they used to be, and I think that some of their market share is eroding.
So, sorry, do you get my sound from here?
We do hear you now.
Okay, I was a little bit worried I was missing there. I have a comment on this discussion.
Yes.
That would be great. Do you have a camera by chance?
Sorry?
Do you have a camera by chance?
I haven't. Yes, but I have no idea how to get it working in this Hangout.
That's okay. Well, first, before you give your comment, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I was going to do that. I'm in Denmark. First off, also it's a Friday evening here. It's a bit complicated hour, but anyway, my name is actually Peter. The name you see, PCAS, is my company. I have a consulting company working with project management in different industries, manufacturing mainly, and product development. And I've been doing that for 20 years. So
nice.
And it's Peter, you said?
Peter, yes.
Great. I have seen you a couple of times trying to get on to the Hangout, and I'm glad you made it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So
sometimes when I start to try on, my wife yells, now it's time for supper. So sorry. But today I'm alone, so I can do whatever I like.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Go ahead. You had a comment about what we were talking about.
Yeah, because in the concept of project management, I think that a lot of the things that we're talking about now, the complexity of things, the speed of development, the agile approach, a lot of it is changing my way of project managing. Because I can't, 20 years ago, I understood most of what went on from a technical perspective. And I have no chance anymore because things are so rapid changing, and it's been so complex. I need to rely much more on the people in the project to know what they're doing. So my challenge today is much more getting the people to work together, getting the startup of the project better, getting the requirements much better, involving a lot of people that can set up these requirements. 20 years ago, we sat down around a table and we decided what to do, and then we started working. And if we do that today, the world will run around us. I mean, just like Microsoft you just discussed. That it's impossible. It's become much more complex and much more focused on setting up the right requirements, setting up the control of requirements, because a lot of things are happening there.
Well, that's interesting. There's a couple of things that you said there that, first of all, I think you're right on target. One of the things, a couple of things that I noticed that you said that stand out to me is, one of them is, it is requiring, and we are going to move into the discussion of what does this mean as project managers. It is requiring us as project managers, because technology is moving so fast, it's hard for us, especially for us older guys, to keep up with the industry in technology. And so we have to rely more and more on our teams, and sometimes with specialists, and sometimes those younger guys that understand and are able to keep up with some of those things. So, right, I think that one of the things we do is we have to rely more on our teams. Alan, any thoughts about what Peter said?
Yeah, well, Peter has pointed out some really interesting things about how the rate of change, right, that knowledge gap, that learning gap, really has made us more dependent on other people to be knowledgeable in different ways that we're not able to keep up with. I really like that comment, and I appreciate Peter bringing it up. I agree completely.
And what I see is that if I look at the project training that we got earlier, and much of the books that are written about projects, it's the technical part of project management that is actually described there and setting up all the rules and procedures. But it's, in my view, at least if it's just a little bit complex, it's much more about management today than it was 10 years ago. I mean, managing people. I mean, because the specialists are much more different than they were. I mean, 10 years ago, you had a bunch of mechanical engineers working together and maybe some electrical engineers. Now you have designers and you have marketing guys getting involved in projects. You have all kinds of different people. So you need a lot of managing, people managing. I mean.
So you think that because of the changes, it's causing a project manager to step up their game on their soft skills, on the ability to communicate, to be able to work with their teams, and
Exactly.
that type of thing for managing the teams.
It's been in my world. It's become more and more important.
Agreed. Well, so let's move. I know that Alan will love this because I think that one of the things that you can't really talk about this concept of how things move fast without talking about Agile. I don't think an Agile approach is meaning it doesn't have to be Scrum, but being more Agile in the way we do project management. I think that's one of the things that's causing us to do, and of course that's the advent of the Agile methodologies and that. So the methodologies, I think, are changing, and I know that Alan, you're an Agile coach. So how's the agility of a project play into the game?
Well, to kind of steer around the different alternatives to Agile, if you wanted to talk about alternatives. Hey, we got Peter on there. It's good. If we wanted to talk about the different thoughts, there's things beyond Agile or things that I guess you could say mesh well with the Agile Manifesto ideas. Some of my favorites are, for example, Edward Snowden. Not that Edward Snowden, but a different Edward Snowden, is a gentleman out of Europe who has an interesting framework called the Cynefin framework, CYNFIN, I believe. But he talks about how systems can be simple, complex. Simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic. And in each of those domains or environments, we need to behave in different ways. And the reality is, especially in the software world, but more and more in all kinds of different ways that we're doing business, our businesses are being pushed into the complex arena, where it used to only be complicated. Complicated meaning like a car, a vehicle, building a car is a complicated thing, but you can actually understand it. Right? People will study how mechanically how it works. People will understand how the pieces fit together, and you can have specialists understand a complicated car. A complex environment means you have a lot of independent actors, like people, working together, and you get emergent behaviors that you don't expect. And as we write software, for example, software gets complicated and it creates emergent behaviors, things that we didn't design in, but what it does and not what we expected. So looking at the Cynefin framework is a good way, one of those ideas that's great to think about how we handle a complex environment as opposed to a complicated or simple environment. And so that's one good idea to think about as a project manager. Am I in a complex environment here? And if I'm in a complex environment, I need to do some probe, sense, and respond instead of doing a hard fixed plan that I believe will be followed for the next 6 months. And so that's one idea that's good to start thinking about and change the way you manage a project.
Yeah, so you're right. The depending on the complexity of your project will really make a difference on how you have to address that.
Well, it's, for example, there was one client that I worked with that quite literally would take 3 to 6 months to approve a project, right? So let's say that company is suddenly faced with, a startup somewhere that's eating into their main market share. Can they really afford to take 3 to 6 months to figure out how to respond to that new competition? I don't think they can. And so they need to come up with ways to adjust how they do things to match this new environment that they're in. And better to go through the learning curve on some new way that embraces change before you need it than to have to be under the gun and have to create it while you need it.
Peter, do you have any thoughts along with what Alan has to say?
Well, actually, I haven't been using Agile methods very much. The kind of projects that I've been working with, we have been using Agile methods, but only as on sub areas. I mean, like a smaller part of a development team, and I still have problems finding out how to use it when we involve all the stakeholders that are part of a project today. I mean, it's fair enough if I have a group of software guys or mechanical engineers. I can figure out how to use Agile methods for that, and it works fine. But when I have to place it in the concept of an overall frame where you are measured and progress and costs and what have you, it becomes difficult for me to use it simply. So I haven't really got much experience on the overall project using Agile methods.
Well, I guess
in limited, I mean, in sub projects or sub tasks, but on the overall project, and maybe it's a good solution for today's project environment. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that to me, I am a Scrum Master. I actually run mostly waterfall projects. We had a hangout a few weeks ago about being agile in a waterfall world. I think that was a great discussion because quite often, because of where we are at, Agile is growing in popularity, but frankly, there's a long ways to go. Project managers are finding themselves in a waterfall world, living with seeing the need to have happen, be a little bit more agile, and introducing agile types of whether they're tools or just concepts that happen in the truly agile world. And if you integrate some of those concepts, even just as simple as having daily stand-ups in a waterfall project, that can help with the agility. So I hear what you're saying is that I do have some Scrum projects, but most of my projects are in a waterfall world, but I still use some agile techniques. And what's causing me to do that is because of this thing we're talking about, the changes that are happening so quickly. The business is having to have solutions quicker than they used to have, or that need and those requirements. We are getting away from the point where we have time to build the full requirements and then build. So whether you phase a waterfall project or we go a strictly agile or it's a mix of them, I think that all of that is really driven by the fact that change is happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah, just the concept of incremental, right? Incremental and iterative building, even if you're not doing full agile. One of the things that can help us when we don't have all the answers and we can't possibly have all the answers at once, we can take small steps and small pieces, small prototypes, small slices of the functionality we need to build. In the mechanical world, Peter, I'm sure you're fully aware of like 3D printers and things like that allow us to prototype physical parts rapidly and inexpensively, so that we can go through 50 iterations of a physical design in a very quick way without having to spend oodles of money. So all of these kinds of technologies are helping us to do smaller slices so that we can build on small successes, as opposed to trying to do a full design that we know is going to be right a year and a half from now.
Agreed. That's a perfect example.
Yeah, it's a fine example, and of course also in project use agile methods, and Scrum boards and stuff. It's very fun. But the problem for me is that often as a consultant, I get into a company that has a predefined way of running projects, and typically it's some kind of stage gate model. Yeah. That's what the financial guys understand. Stage gate model, we can check if you're on track. And it conflicts a little bit with. I mean, I can still use the agile methods in some of the sub areas of that. It's fine, but if I really should change the way we do projects to a more agile way of doing the entire project, I struggle to find a way to do that. I mean, trying to get around these stage gate models, which are fine for controlling and checking, but are not very good for actually managing a project.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, so yeah, it's difficult to change the expected output or expected artifacts that a project creates within certain companies because they've been doing it that way for a long time. It's part of those mental models that I was talking about. You know, that this is the way we've always done it. It seems to work still for us, and so we're just going to keep going. The difficulty that you have in trying to create such change in an environment like that is to quantify the cost and the drag that you have on the project because of those things. Mm-hmm. But it can be useful to have those conversations and talk about that. Often it takes some sort of competitor or competitive threat before such fundamental assumptions of how to do business before people are willing to review their fundamental assumptions of how to do business.
I mean, sometimes the first when you get that argument from somebody, one of the first questions that I usually ask is, okay, so if you have this very fine model and it's all working, why did you call a consultant? I mean,
yeah,
there's a reason why am I here? Somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
No, hey, Alan, just to change the discussion a little bit, you mentioned that you, before we started, that you are having to step out a little early.
Yes, I'm watching the clock here. So.
Okay, so I just wanted to give your thought. So we've talked about the changes and how quick things are happening. What do we think might be happening in the future? What kinds of changes do we have to do in the future? Where do we think the future of project management is going, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, I would, of course I'm prejudiced, but I'm thinking that Agile, the Agile Manifesto, the ideas that are there, I think are going to start permeating other places. And they may not look exactly the same as they do now. But the idea of collaboration, of small incremental development, of customers working directly with the people who are building the thing that the customer wants, smaller things. So let me just rattle off some really radical things, and then I'll hang up and not watch the storm that happens.
Yeah, Peter and I will talk about it afterwards.
There are companies, for example, that are going to a venture capitalist model within the company. In other words, if I'm somebody who works in the company, I have this really cool idea of something that can improve the company's bottom line or improve the company's products. I actually need to create a proposal of how that would work, go to somebody to get funding, they fund me on, so it becomes like this venture capital kind of thing with many companies within a company. And you can look at companies such as Valve. Very famously, they post their Valve employee manual about a year and a half or so ago that talks about how they don't have any management and that teams form organically. People come up with ideas and have to sell that idea to their coworkers to create a project around it. Things like that are going to start happening, I think. We can also look at Spotify has a really interesting Agile model. It's based on some Agile principles, but they don't really follow Scrum or any other of the main frameworks. And you can go find Spotify's. There's a white paper been written on how Spotify runs their teams and develops their software, which is very interesting and very flat. There's I wish I could remember their name now. There's a company in California that is one of the largest tomato processing companies and tomato distributors in the world, and they have a completely flat model with no managers. And you can go find information about them. I think those kinds of companies that are able to react and form and morph as the competition and landscape changes, I think those kind of companies and that kind of structure is going to become more common.
So what you're suggesting is not even agile in the sense of project management, but businesses themselves and the way that they produce their products and services are likely to change.
Right. We're going to end up getting things like the corporation is going to say, we need a solution for this. You 20 people, here's a budget, here's money, go find a solution. Right. And then those 20 people are largely independent and autonomous, and simply have to feed back ROI to the company who is their investors, as it were. I think those kinds of things are going to happen more and more often. Simply because this rate of change is going to keep accelerating, and I don't see a way to keep up in these monolithic, highly controlled, highly process-heavy kinds of environments that we've set up for ourselves that worked well. I'm saying they worked very well. They got us to where we are now, but I think things are changing enough that they're not going to work well in the future, and we're going to have to reinvent the way we do business.
Interesting concept, and I think that will probably be a lot dependent on the industry. Some industries are moving faster than others, and the PM chat's been talking a little bit about that earlier. So yeah, and probably size of companies might change. Whether you get a large company that's able to spin off smaller groups like what you're talking about, or the small startups are going to take innovative ways of doing it. I was listening to a talk. I don't remember where it was. It was a podcast, but they were talking about how WordPress, the makers of, it's actually the company. I don't remember the name of the company, but they're the ones that make WordPress. And how innovative they are on how they go about it. They don't even have nobody is centralized. Everybody is a distributed environment. So just concepts about how the workforce is, just the skill sets and we haven't even talked about that. Companies will have to be going all over the world just to get the skill sets that they need. Going back to Peter's point of view, if technologies are changing so fast, will companies have to go all over the world to find those experts on that specific technology, and allowing them to work remotely and that type of a thing? There's just lots of different ideas of there, and I know you probably need to get going pretty soon.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to drop off right now. So I appreciate the discussion. Thank you, and it was good to meet you, Peter.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
And thank you, Ellen, for the suggestion and the concept. This is a great concept. So, and thank you for joining.
Okay.
Have a great day.
All right, see you.
So, Peter, your thoughts on any of these things that we've been talking about?
But I think the last discussion here about the changes in the setup of the companies and the way people work together. I mean, it's been ongoing for many years now, at least in Denmark. I don't know much about your environment over there, but in Denmark it's been pushing that direction for many years, and actually there's a kind of a push back that now management has come in a little bit into focus again, because it got too much to be a multi-direction show, because people were working in groups that needed to be aligned somehow anyway. So I agree that the world is going to change, and if I look at my children, they have been brought up to work completely different from the way that I was brought up to work. I mean, they're in schools, they are only working in teams and project oriented, and it's coming. There's no doubt. That's what they expect when they get out to a working environment in any company.
Oh,
And it doesn't matter if they're going to be developing things or just working on a production line.
well, you bring up a great point. I was thinking about this earlier today in getting ready for this. Is just the nature of project management is going to change because I am a PMP. I've been a PM. I was certified. When was it? It was in 2000, and I think that my certification is like 39,000. And today, I don't even know what the number is at, but it's several 100,000. As I think about, you mentioned your kids are in school, working in teams and projects. My son also, they just got done doing a project, and they took the project approach, and more companies are using that project methodology to be able to get work done. And because of that, it's going to cause more and more of the need for project managers and the skill sets that we have. So just the improvements that we, the more the merrier, I guess, is part of it. But also go to a little bit of thing that I know that Robert Kelly in PM Chat, he talks a lot about is we have to move ourselves away from just being order takers and form people that just fill out forms, and as that change happens, we need to be driving that change. We need to be able to put on our I guess our entrepreneur hat and thinking differently on how we manage projects so that we can be, even if we're not in an agile environment, being more agile on how we manage our projects.
Yeah, yes, and it's one of the tricks in I mean, one of the problems, as I see it, is that because project management, I mean, setting up things in projects have been kind of an answer to a lot of things, to anything. So a lot of tasks are being done that are basically just daily operation, but they have been transformed into projects because that's the setup. That it sounds flexible. It sounds like everybody gets involved, and so we need a new term or a new way of working that takes care of a lot of things that today is called projects, because basically they're not projects because they're just things that needs to be done. But setting them up in a project environment sorts of makes the real project management difficult because everybody's a project manager.
Yeah, and that's true. Everybody is turning out to be project managers, and some of them understand how to do that, and some of them don't.
Yeah.
Peter, we're at the top of the hour. I am so glad that you were, first of all, that you joined. Secondly, that you were able to get your sound and then your video working. And I have to tell you, I think you have a cool model in the back of you. That is a cool ship that you've got.
Yeah.
Did you build that?
No, it's something that I inherited from my father.
Is that right?
It's about 1 meter and 20 long and 1 meter and 10 high, so it's quite big.
That is absolutely beautiful. I think that is really, really cool. And did your father build it?
He had an uncle that built it.
Wow.
So it's quite old. It's I don't know. It's 100 years or so.
The model is 100 years old?
Yeah, it was. It's from back in the family somewhere. And then we had It was in a poor state when my father found it in the attic of a house from his parents, and it got rebuilt by his uncle.
Well, it is absolutely beautiful.
It's a nice piece, but you need it takes up a little bit of space. So I have it in the office because my wife thinks it's if somebody needs to dust it, it has to be me.
Well, again, Peter, thank you so much. I really enjoy your comments. You're welcome anytime in the future in any of these hangouts.
I will try to participate when I can. I think it's it's interesting for me to hear what's being discussed elsewhere. So it's nice.
Yeah, thank you. I think it gives a great opportunity for for us throughout the world to hear and see how people are managing projects and the different topics that are, excuse me, that are important, and how it's evasive all the way around the world, not just in the United States or in Denmark or Australia or wherever. It's pervasive throughout. So
And it's not going to be less, because if I look at the projects that I'm involved in and the companies that I'm involved in, they have, I mean, the last few projects I've been in have been spread out over the world, because there's somebody in India doing some designs, and they have some production going on in the States or Germany or Turkey, wherever. So the projects are not just something that takes place in my little spot in Denmark anymore. It's all over the world.
Right, and then we didn't even talk about that much about the distribution of the projects, because you're absolutely right. It's no longer local projects; they are worldwide projects in many cases.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to sign off. Just thank you again for joining us here on the Sensible Project Manager Hangout. I want to wish everybody good luck as you manage your projects in a changing world. Hold on tight. You might not get bucked off. All right. Have a great one. Talk to you later, Peter.
Yeah. Talk to you. Bye.
All right. Bye.